Okay, this has been brought by the trade union to you by the trade union movement, but it's also being brought to you by the Labour Party. The local Labour Party here, the Wells Constituency Labour Party, has a very, very hard-working and dedicated chair, who is also, in his union, is the UCU chair for Bridgewater College, who have fought a very, very successful campaign. So he's both a campaigning trade unionist and a campaigning Labour Party member. John Fones.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. I think one of the things you always learn when you're going to speak at an event like this is that you need to get together with your other speakers, because I think I've probably got to get rid of the first 10 pages of my speech, having just listened to Robin. What I really wanted to do today is talk a little bit about our response to the economy and to market forces. I want to say a little bit, if possible, about housing and how we should be doing something about that. And I want to say a little bit as well about how we should be operating as trade unionists in solidarity with each other, not only here, but across the nation and indeed internationally as well. After our local elections this week in Mendip and Sedgemoor, should Labour voters be mourning and should we be downhearted? Well, we might be a little bit sad, but we are not downhearted, are we? Are we? No. We should be sad, I think, that voters chose to show their dissatisfaction with national politics and the Brexit fiasco by voting for people who do little to turn the tide for ordinary people like you and me. We should be sad that we're now saddled with that Brexit fiasco, which will be the legacy of Tory posh boys like Cameron, Johnson, Osborne and Gove, and the populist rhetoric of a merchant banking spiv turned demagogue who spends his time trousering more cash speaking to right-wing audiences in the States and pandering to racism by slandering and caricaturing working-class communities in this country. We should be sad that voters have turned their backs on loyal and hard-working councillors like Mick Lerry in Sedgemoor. If he'd been re-elected, he would have been fighting hard in council to promote new social housing schemes that would be in the face of continuing austerity measures which are coming from central government. That we should be sad about. But should we be downhearted and depressed? No, we shouldn't. Because the Labour movement is strong here in Somerset. The Labour movement is growing here in Somerset. The Labour movement, working trades unionists, are standing shoulder to shoulder with each other in campaigns in many, many different workplaces. We have an opportunity now. One of the benefits of losing an election is that we can tell it how we see it. Not in an attempt to win votes, but in an attempt to build the movement by speaking a few home truths. And I want to speak about some of those issues I mentioned before. So here we are again in Wells, marching in the grand tradition of workers everywhere, marching in support of workers everywhere. We're marching to show our solidarity and our support for working people here in rural Somerset, and our support for working people in a great manufacturing and industrial town like Swindon, where the workers of the Honda factory threatened because the company says it no longer makes business sense. They're threatened despite the fact that the town will feel that the heart has been ripped out of the local economy. This is where we should be building the vehicles that will power the green revolution in transport that is threatening that we need to combat the environmental catastrophe which is threatening to engulf this century and to wreck the lives of our children and grandchildren. But no, because market forces and so-called business logic dictate otherwise. How many jobs are going to be lost to these triple philosophies, the false and pernicious philosophies of Brexit, austerity and free market forces? Jobs lost through a contraction in our economy. Jobs lost due to the asset stripping and handing over of assets to private companies. Jobs lost as a result of the iniquitous private financing initiatives that were actually brought through even by the Blairite government, and that only a socialist government can now roll back. These calamities have resulted in a lack of national and local investment in our future. How many more companies and organisations are going to be pushed into making workers redundant because of Tory and Lib Dem austerity measures? Because of austerity and a lack of investment. Remember that austerity economics are a hark back to the economic policies of Thatcher and Keith Joseph and Norman Tebbit. We were persuaded, or some people were persuaded then, that we had to consider investment and state intervention in the economy as anathema. I remember Tony Benn speaking at a rally at City Hall, Newcastle. He then repeated it, the Durham Miners' Gala. I'll be going there again this year. Anybody else who wants to come with me, let me know. We can organise a trip up there. Tony Benn said, and I paraphrase, it's difficult to understand what is meant by monetarism and austerity unless you have a degree in economics. And then he went on to say, although in truth, if you have a degree in economics, it makes it even harder to understand monetarism and austerity. What it does lead to is losing growth and losing jobs. And I'm talking about real jobs, not the jobs that the Tories tout, 0 hours contracts, minimum hours contracts, in so many industries where people old and young are not sure whether they're going to have any hours next month, where companies can ride roughshod over workers' rights because working people don't even know if they're going to have a job next month. Just remember, when you go shopping next time, remember that last year Sainsbury workers were threatened by the management that if they didn't sign new contracts, they would be out on their ear within days. Just remember that. Just remember that USDOR and Unite trade unionists were fighting about that last year. We didn't hear much about it because the workers at Sainsbury were told they couldn't say anything about it. But we can. Just remember the Argos workers in Somerset last year who were told their jobs were going to be moved to a different part of the country. Remember the brakes workers in Highbridge, now moved to Avonmouth. And remember the workers, many of them workers from abroad, who are working in the Morrison's distribution centre in Bridgewater, where workers can be told at the last minute of their working day that they've got to stay on for another hour. And they have to do it because otherwise they're out on their ear. Those are the things we need to be thinking about when we are supporting working people in this country and internationally. We should also be thinking of workers in the Trelleborg company in Bridgewater, where they have just actually announced that they are going to be in dispute and are going on strike again because of some of the appalling practices of their management, where you've got a managing director who is going around the workplace tearing down trade union notices, where you've got a manager who is actually taking a worker through a disciplinary procedure because he is wearing a trade union badge, where you've actually got a manager who is coming out onto a picket line and assaulting members of that picket line. And this is all in the name of good management. When I speak at my workplace, I remind my principal and everyone else, when they remind me we need to stick to British values, that one of the main British values that we have in this country is management bullying. The intimidation of workers by management goes on, and it is only trade unions who act to scrutinise that, to challenge that, and to stop that. I'm going to move on a little bit because I know I'm going to be pulled off the stage in a minute, possibly by two burly guys. However, I'm sure they'll be friendly about it. Let's not forget, please, that in a time of austerity, when Somerset County Council, a council that has wittingly gone along with the austerity agenda by cutting services, but still finds itself as the council most likely to follow in the footsteps of Northampton, a council so broke and useless that it couldn't even afford to have elections last week. Somerset is likely to be going along that route very soon if they're not careful. And this is in a time of austerity, when the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, quoting my friend Bernie Grant down here, the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, in one of his first moves, gave away 71 billion pounds to corporations in tax cuts. The Labour Party is talking about a manifesto which is costed at 48 billion pounds. And it's easy to see where that's going to come from. Hammond's latest figures are 110 billion pounds. And where does that go? It's trousered. It's put into pension schemes. It's put into investments for people at the top. And people who are ordinary working people at the very bottom of the pyramid are seeing none of it. And that's where it should be going. What a magnificent march this has been then. We've got people here from all over. Thank you very much, Robin, for being here today. We're lucky that we had him here today. In the original plan before the European parliamentary elections, North East Somerset were going to be holding their hustings today. Thank goodness we've got people from North East Somerset to represent them. Very soon we'll have a really good candidate who will be able to fight against Mr. Rees-Mogg. Mr. Rees-Mogg, another Tory posh boy who seems to be doing things according to the precepts and practices of a forgotten era. An era of patronage and inherited wealth that does little for the many but continues to line the pockets of the few. Another Tory posh boy who seems to want to recall not so much the divine right of kings, but the divine right of Etonian Tory posh boys to tell the rest of us what's good for us, but in the meantime to line their own pockets. And what is good for us? What's good for us is better rights, better pay, better conditions, and the right to better conditions in our ordinary everyday lives, which means things like housing. I remember Tony Benn again telling us that when the Tories allowed people to buy their own houses, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it gave people the opportunity to have mortgages, to actually put themselves in hock to banks, to actually make sure that for the rest of their lives, in some cases, they would be scared of being put out of work because they didn't know whether they would be able to pay the next month's mortgage. That's something we need to bear in mind as well. And the last thing I'm going to say, which is the third thing that Tony Benn said, this is the last thing I'm going to say, is that if we are actually standing together in solidarity as trade unionists, we have to remember that it doesn't matter how much you struggle this year, it doesn't matter how much you win this year, you will have to win it again next year, because the forces of capitalism, the forces of management in this country will be down on you again and again and again. And unless you actually struggle and fight every single year, you will lose it. So are we going to continue to struggle? Yes, we are. Are we going to continue to fight? Yes, we are. And are we going to continue to win and win and win again? Yes, we are. Thank you very much, friends and comrades.